Okay, welcome everyone. Today we're in conversation with Dr. Paul Swan, talking cubes, looking at the mathematical value of a cube with a variety of activities from addition to geometry, not geometrical, geometry and problem solving. So we've got these cubes today. If you don't have any, if you could find some blocks, cubes, or even Lego, can I say Lego? Even some Lego. They're a staple in our house, Paul. We've used them a lot with my children. I use them with my older child for maths. We do maths concepts, we do patterning, construction. But with my younger one, we talk about the language and we talk about the colours and the shapes and the sizes. And he's only between 2 and 3. So sometimes it ends up more on the floor than actually talking. But anyway, we do have fun. It's good fun way to control. But also you'll find that our cubes are a staple in classrooms. So that's one of the main reasons we're going to talk about today. I'd also just like to mention their great collaboration with Dr. Paul Swan and EDX Education, and it's the mathsmaterials.com website. It's got a lot of information for teachers, for parents on maths materials, mathematical language. It's got videos and activities and so much more. And there's more videos going up every month. I think it is every month. So please log on, have a look. And just so I don't take up too much time, let's welcome Dr. Paul Swan, international presenter and award-winning author. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Heather. I hope that today's session people will get a bit from it. And as you say, you need something that you can construct with, would help, and ideally a cube, but other blocks will do the same sort of thing. So just to get us a little bit of a start, I just want to talk about cubes in general, and then I'll use particularly one set of cubes for the rest of the activities that happen there. So I'll just get you a look on our visualizer here, and I'll explain the difference between different sorts of cubes and some of the language to do with it as well. So I'll just get you a look down here, and I've got a few different types of cubes. I'll start just here at the top here. You'll see that these are just, we would call them 1 centimetre cubes. And in fact, they're 1 cubic centimetre. So when we talk about things being in cc's and so forth, that's what we're talking about. Now that one is just a plain cube, doesn't join on any side. You can also get the idea of the centre cube, which will join on various sides, and then you can start building and constructing. Some people will be familiar with these, which are called unifix cubes. They're called unifix because literally they fix in one place, unifix. So that's one idea that sits there. Very popular cube that you can use. But what we're going to do today is we'll just use these cubes here. Now, just a small comment. These are often referred to as 2 centimetre cubes, and they are. They're 2 centimetres across. But we need to understand that actually 8 of those small cubes would fit on top of one of those or in it. So it actually has a volume of 8 cubic centimetres. So we're going to play with a few ideas and a couple of other words that will come up today. If we're going to formalise the language a little bit later, when we're doing simple construction, let's not get too formal. But later on, when you move into later parts of the school, we would talk about parts of the cube. So there would be vertices, and there'd be faces, and there'd be edges. So we've got those sort of ideas there. So just to get us on the way, we're going to talk a little bit about construction activities. Now, Heather mentioned earlier that the idea that young children naturally enjoy constructing or building things. And you may notice there's a few examples behind me there of things that have been built and constructed. Now, we might not see that as being mathematics, but really when you're constructing things and you're putting things together, there's a lot of mathematics going on. So once again, I'll just get you to have a look at the visualizer and I'll show you exactly what I mean. We'll just use a couple of different cubes here to show you this. I'll use just a couple of different colors and you see what I mean about when we start to do some construction. So I've just got black and green, for example, here. And essentially one of the things that happens when we construct is you'll feel that there's some motor skills going on. I just love that little pop of these particular cubes. And you start to see that we've got this idea, they're joining together, and it takes me a bit of effort. And of course these can twist. And you notice that I've just rotated it and twisted it and turned it. So we've got the turning idea that's happening here. And as we join here, we can join in various directions. And so you start to get some construction that's happening here. And as I said, it's a bit of the motor skills and pushing them together and so on. But of course, should be aware that if we're going to do construction, you can get other pieces. I just love the double cube because that allows us to do what I'm going to call brick construction. And so that, if you look here, I've just built similar to what you might see when bricks come together. And that allows you to a lot more options when you have a double cube, so to speak. There are other pieces that you can often get in construction. So here's a couple of examples, like a little corner piece that can go in here, and that allows us to get that sort of idea. We can have the rounded piece. And so instead of having that one there, you've got one that's rounded. You can even make so to speak, by having a tube that fits in. So there's a lot of versatility in terms of construction. And as I said, as children are constructing, they're learning some spatial awareness. They're flipping things over, they're turning things, they're joining things, they're putting things together, and therefore they're learning a lot of this early geometry, so to speak. Now it's in 3 dimensions, which is pretty neat as well. So I quite like to encourage construction. It also has the notion of creativity. And sometimes children will say to me, oh, that's a crocodile, or that's something like that, or that's an emu, or something, something like an elephant. And so in their mind, they've constructed something, built something, and I like the creative play. I think that's a very big deal. We're going to sort of start now with just some early number work, just to formalize it a little bit more. And the other thing I should have mentioned, and I'll show you on the visualizer as well, is quite often it's really handy to have one of these baseboards. Now the baseboard allows you to build the things that are not falling over. And I've actually created something already, and I'm just going to bring it here. So this was created a little bit earlier. So I've got something built on the baseboard, and I'm just now going to put the baseboard on there, and I'm going to turn it over sideways. And you can see that I've built the staircase that's sitting there. Now we're going to use that staircase in a minute, but the baseboard just gives me a bit of control and allows me to move things around even in, say, in a classroom environment. And I think it's very useful. Another thing with the baseboard, of course, is later on we can talk about building things in places. So this gives you like a coordinate board. And so I could build something at this point or something at this point and so forth. So the baseboard is a really handy add-on. But I'm just going to take these bits out. I'm just going to unplug them, and we have number ideas. And I've just made these sticks. And essentially I've made a staircase of sticks, and you'll see that I've got some black ones, and I've done it in 2 distinct colors, so it'll become pretty obvious about what we're going to do today with this material. So all I've got is, for want of a better word, a staircase that's happening here. And I'd just like to play with a few ideas that sit in here. So for example, we've got something that's 10 long. But if I join this black piece and this one here, we can see that another name for 10 is 9 and 1. And we could just keep building that way. I could have 8 and 2. You see, I'm just putting them together. And so now I've got the 8 and the 2. And I could now put that right next to the 10. And we can check that we've got a stick of 10. It doesn't matter which way we turn it round, it's still 10. Now, a couple of small things, this might not seem like a big deal here, but the fact that I can gauge that or get the length of 10, and then I've got 8 and 2 is 10, but if I just turn that around, I can see I've also got 2 and 8. So 8 and 2 and 2 and 8 both give me 10. Now, the fancy name for that is the commutative property of addition. We call them turnaround facts. But you could take any stick of cubes. So in this case here, I've got, so you can have a look here, I've got 4 and 2, so I've got 6. We could take all the things that make 6, and I'll give you an example. So we're now going to make 5, and if I just grab one black cube, you'll see I've got 5 and 1 is 6. Or I could have 4 and 2, and I could have 3 and 3, and you start to see, let's put the 3 and 3 together, because that's a nice one. You hear that nice popping that's happening here as we're doing this. There we go. So I've got 3 and 2, so that's not 6. I need to add one more in, and now I've got 6. And I can compare that to a length of cubes that is 6 long. And so we're building some simple ideas of addition, and you can see the addition really nicely when you have 2 different cubes. Now, if you wanted to turn that into a game, all you need is some dice, and you roll the dice, and you might roll a single dice or a die, and that might show 4. So you build with 4 cubes, and then you might roll again, and it might show 2. So I've got 4 and 2, so that's a 3 and a 2, so I better build a 4 and a 2, and altogether I've got 6. So I could just do a really simple game, rolling the dice twice, build with one colour, build with the other colour, and I've got the full length. And that's a really simple addition game that you could play. We've already talked before in the past about different coloured dice, but I've got some different coloured ones here. In fact, we'll put them on the visualizer so you can see them a little bit easier there. So if you take the different dice that we have there, you will notice I've got different colors and with different numbers on them. So these match the colors, for example, match the colors. So that 2 matches the colors of that one there. And in a previous presentation, I mentioned how you can play a really nice game where you roll the dice and you get the value of the tower. In this case, each blue one's worth 2. That tower's 10 high, so that would be worth 20. But in a different case, if I rolled, say, a 5, and that was 10 high, that would be worth 50. But we could have 2 different colors there. So I'll give you an example there, and we'll just put a couple of different dice together. So for example, we're still going to make a tower of 10. That's that nice popping sound. And now we've got the 10, but now I'm going to roll 2 dice. And if you look there, I've got those ones are worth 5. So I've got 7 that are worth 5. That's 35. And then I've got 3 that are worth 3. So that's 9. So 35 and 9 will take us to 44. So you start to see how we can get some value in that sort of stuff. So not only are we doing addition, we can start to do some multiplication as well, just by adding some dice. The other thing you can add is just something simple like a domino. And I've mentioned that in an earlier or previous webinar as well. But here's a domino, for example. It's the 5-2 domino. And for young children, they could just build a tower that's 5 high in one color, a tower that's 2 high in another color, join the 2 together, and we've got this addition idea that's sitting in there. So you can see the versatility of the cube that allows me to do a lot of this sort of work. And sometimes we just join another piece with it, and it gives a little bit more, a few more options for us in that sense. So that's just some early number work that we're talking about. But obviously we can take that a little bit further. Now, from early number, we often get patterning. Now, patterning really is the heart of a thing called algebra. And so if we start to, basically there's 3 things that are going to happen in patterning. You can copy a pattern, you can continue a pattern, and you can create a pattern. So initially, when children start to work with cubes, what we're looking at is the idea that there would be a pattern started. So I'll give you an example. I'll make one up right now, and it'll be a very simple pattern. So I've just got a blue and a red, and then I have another blue, and then I have another red, and then I'm going to have another blue, and you start to see a pattern forming. And you need to show a reasonable run of that pattern before children could work out, well, that might be another red, and then I'm going to do another blue. And so one might simply be to copy that pattern, make a copy of it. And that's all right. So we just build that sort of thing there. Later on, we could continue that pattern. So what's the next piece going on here? It'll be a red. What's the piece after that? It's blue, and so forth. Now, in simple terms, we would call that an A-B pattern. So in other words, there's one color. So in this case, we happen to have blue, red, blue, red, blue, red. And that's a pretty basic pattern, and it's pretty neat. Sometimes I get children do actions to the pattern. So for example, when you see a blue, you might click your fingers. Or when you see a red, you might clap. So we get like a bit of a tune going there. Now, after a while, that's a pretty boring pattern. So you might want children to start creating new patterns. So there might be, we might have this one here. So I've got blue, red, red, and maybe we put a black. And then we're going blue, and how's the pattern go again? Red, red, and we follow that through. Now, imagine that we were playing that one. We would need 3 actions to play the music to go with this. All right, so I might say, well, a blue is a click, and red is a clap, and then maybe something like the black is a stomp on the ground. So if you were to play that, it'd be, it's going to be very difficult for me at this point, but there's my click, and then I've got 2 claps, and then I've got a stomp. And so you can start to see that children could learn those sort of ideas that happen there. So you're getting a feel for how patterning can develop, and then it can extend from that point on. Now, I'm just going to grab the baseboard as well, which we mentioned earlier. Now, the baseboard itself, as you can see, is just a really nice example of, for want of a better word, like a graph. And so on the baseboard itself, you can start to form a graph if you wish to. So it might be a graph that shows, and I'll just put a couple of examples here so you can see how it might build, but it might be our favorite fruit. And so we might have something like bananas, and then we might have something that sits here, and I'll just put it here so you can see it's building up. So we've got here, so that might be our bananas. but we might also have strawberries, and I'll just build them in a different colour so you can see there. And so we're getting the idea, a bit like a pictograph that sits in here, and you start to see a graph starting to build. And so we've got strawberries, and we might have, we'll put one other one in there in a minute, but we can see that strawberries are more popular than, in this case, bananas. But let's go for one other thing that we might have here. We might have blueberries, and so we might use blue. We'll use blue pieces to represent the blueberries. And if you notice, you can start to see a graph starting to build. And so just by using the baseboard in conjunction with the cubes, we've built a very simple graph. Now you could do the same with names. Let me give you an example. We could just take some pretty simple names here, and we might use those to represent the people's names. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So we might say David, okay? So if we use David, how many letters are in David? Well, we've got D-A-V-I-D, so 5 letters. And so we would use 5 to represent that. So if you head down to my baseboard again, you'll notice that I've got 5 set up for David. And then I might have a 4-letter name. So let's go with a 4-letter name. Maybe it is Jack. So J-A-C-K, and we got a 4-letter name. And then we might have a 3-letter name, Joe, for example, that sits there. And so we've got exactly the same idea here, but now what I want to talk to you about is statistics. So not only can we do graphs, we can start to get the idea of what's called an average or a mean. And so that's a 5-letter name, a 4-letter name, a 3-letter name. Just on that small sample there, the average length of a name, you can start to see how it's all now, so it is 4 letters long. So in other words, we can even teach some pretty basic statistics just by using these cubes. Now, obviously, have a larger variety of names, we'd start to be moving more cubes around, and sometimes we won't find an exact number like we just got there, but I'm just giving you an example how you can use a cube just to do a pretty basic bit of statistics, and all we're using is the baseboard, and the baseboard acts like a graph in a sense. And as I said, the baseboard can even act, if you've ever played that game Battleships, for example, with coordinates, simply you can start setting up your ships, and we've got basically coordinates would sit along here. So along the bottom we could have 1 to 10, and along the side 1 to 10, and suddenly we got the graph coordinates. And I might put one of my ships here, and you can start to see it goes in this place here, and I might have a ship that's down the bottom there, and then I might have others that are in there. And so essentially you can play Battleships, same thing using the baseboard. But what I'd really like to talk a bit about now is the other uses for these cubes. So I'll just put this baseboard out of the way. They were just pretty simple sort of ideas. But now let's talk about this idea of problem solving, because I always like problem solving. There's 2 sorts of problems I'd like to look at. One is a pretty neat one. It's really about being able to get 3 flavors of ice cream. And so once again, we'll have 3 flavors that are pretty obvious here. We're going to have strawberry, okay? We'll have plain old vanilla, so we'll have white represents the vanilla, and I think we'll have a blueberry ice cream as well. So essentially, if we were making a 3-scoop ice cream, I could have this idea that we've got. On the top, we might have the vanilla, and then the strawberry, and then the blueberry. But what if we were to change the order in which they occurred? So how many different ice creams could you have? Could you have a different one each day of the week, assuming that the order does matter? Particularly if you look from the bottom up, I'm going to get blueberry, then I get strawberry, then I get vanilla. But if I put it around the other way, let's give you another example. If I happen to be looking from the bottom up, I'm going to get vanilla, blueberry, and strawberry. And so the question would be, could I have a different ice cream each day of the week? What if we added 1 extra flavour? And I'll pick an example here. Let's add an extra flavour to this, and let me pick one that might work very nicely. We're going to have, probably most people wouldn't like this one, but we're going to have the licorice flavour. And so we start to see here, now we add a 4-decker quadruple ice cream. How many different ice creams could we have, depending on how we arrange those? That's a very nice problem solving element, and perfect to do with cubes to model that sort of idea. But while we've got 4 cubes, let's talk a little bit about this spatial thinking. And really, when children are doing things like constructing and building and doing this spatial sort of idea, they're basically looking at things like engineering. We might call it STEM sort of things, architecture, those sort of ideas. So they're building that sort of thinking as they're doing this. So let me give you an example. And if you've got some cubes, you might want to think about this a little bit. I've just joined 4 cubes in this way. Sometimes I call this 4 cube houses. Be happy that that's one construction of a house. Now, if I turn it that way, that's a very tall skyscraper, but if it goes that way, it's basically going along the ground. So there's the idea of this rotation that you can see that's happening here. And yeah, maybe because this uses less land, but it's constructing up, might be worth more, or we've got this one here. But just look at how I'm going to make one change to this. I'm going to give this, and look, suddenly I've got a different construction that sits in there, and that's a different way of constructing 4 cubes together. Let me give you another example, and we can be quite systematic about that one. This one is actually fairly tricky. You start to see as I rotate it around, you start to see that it's quite involved, and you look at the top and you look at and so we start to build length, width and breadth, the height, all of those sort of things are building into this. And the question is, how many different 4 cube houses could you make? Now, I'll let you ponder that afterwards, after we finish the webinar, but it's worthwhile thinking about that idea, because if you think, if we just move this piece here and I move it to here, well, now I've got a different construction that is sitting there. And so this starts to get your problem solving going, your geometric, your spatial reasoning going, and it's quite important we understand that a lot of the creative industries use this spatial reasoning that happens there. So you're getting a feel that the cube itself is quite versatile. We've only looked at a few ideas that sit behind the cube, but you start to get a feeling for what we can do. Now, as you look at this one here, and I'll put us on the visualizer so you'll get this idea. Okay, let's put this down so you can have a look at it and just see the different views. Now, essentially here, we can talk about building plans, okay? And we might have a plan here, and sometimes we refer to them as the front view and the top view and the side view, etc. So you can actually draw these in the front view, top view, side view. That would be one way of doing it. Another way that you can draw this is with what they call isometric dot paper. And that means you'll get that sort of 3D look to it and so forth. But another way would be to draw some plans. And so I quite like children to communicate this. So I'm going to draw a little bit of a plan on this bit of paper, and you'll see what I mean about us being able to draw plans to visualize sorts of ideas. So let me show you here, and we'll just do it on the visualizer, and you'll get an idea of what we're going to draw and what it might look like. So if you have a look down here, I'm going to put a little plan in place. Now, essentially, we've got these cubes and they're 2 centimetre footprint. So if you watch, I'm going to draw this for us. So roughly I've got, can you see I've just drawn a little footprint here, and I've got another one here. So we're looking from the top down. That's really what we're talking about here. And then we go across here, and I'm just going to build another little piece here, and you're getting a feeling for what this shape or this 3D object might look like. So we've got a bit of a footprint, okay, and I could put a cube basically at each one of those spots. But now, actually, this is a building that's not flat, it goes up. And so by very simple change to this plan, we can start to really formulate the idea of what the plan's going to be. In fact, if I put a 2 here, what that's telling me is that the cubes are going to be built too high, okay? So in this case here, I'm going to grab a couple of cubes, doesn't really matter what color they are, but you could see that I built that too high. If you can't quite see, you'll see what I've done here. Well, the cube next to it is also going to be too high, and so I'll grab these couple of pieces. I'm just going to turn them so they happen at this point here, and so I start to construct this idea. Now this one's going to be a bit taller. I'm going to make that 3 high. And so you can start to see how children could start to record what they build. And so I've got this notion here, it's 3 high. And now let's just, for good measure, that one will be 1 high, and that'll be 1 high. So I'm going to build that one. That one, of course, they would come together and so forth. And let's make this one 2 high as well. And I'll just build this piece that's 2 high. And you start to get an idea of a construction happening. And I really like this sort of building of the plan, because the plan is now, we see how good this is. So I built this one, and once again, if you wanted to, you could draw an image from one side one side of it, the front view and the top view. But what's really neat is when children use that plan and they give it to someone else. So I'll get you to have a look back down onto the visualizer and you get an idea of what I mean. Okay, so imagine you don't have the cubes there anymore and all you've got is this. And so now what you do is that would be given to another child, or maybe a parent working with a child, or vice versa, would draw that little plan up and then someone has to build the model. And so you could have the model sitting off to one side and can compare the plan to the original sort of idea that sits there. So you start to see that there is such a variety of things that you can do with the cube. It's extremely versatile. So just let me run through with you again. We've talked just about the 2 centimetre cube, the linking cube. So they basically link on all 6 sides, and that makes it very easy. The nice part about it is when you've got the linking cube, see it swivels as well, which is pretty neat. So we've got that idea, but you can see that it's going to join on all of those sides, and that gives you lots of options. Okay, so that'll allow you to do everything that, say, something like a unifix cube will do. You can just build in one way, but it then allows you to build in length, width, and so forth. And we can start building onto the side. We can build onto the front. And so that gives you this idea that's happening here. Now that's another 4 cube house. So there's another idea for you in the 4 cube house notion. But if you think about that, we talked at the start of this webinar about construction, and sometimes it's just play. But in fact, when you're playing and you're joining these things together, you're using your imagination and you're learning some pretty key spatial skills building in the 3 dimensions. But the other thing that's happening when you add some of these other pieces, you can actually see that that cube there, well, it's not a cube, in fact, it's half a cube. And so it's having you can start to see here, now we get into some angles. And when people are using those, and when they start to use the quarter round piece, and when they start using these other pieces, you really get some real inventiveness happening there. Now, while you're doing that, you're building that language, which we talked about. So a reminder, you're talking about vertices, and you're talking about faces, and you're talking about edges. When you're constructing, you're building these motor skills, you're building the language, and really you're getting this idea of this spatial awareness. Now, not only that, when we start putting 2 colours together, do you remember when we put 2 colours together, we're able to look at things like the number idea. So there you can see that adding is really about joining. But let's take the other idea that sits here. So I now have a stick of 10, okay? But I could break that at any point. Okay, now I have a stick of 4 and a stick of 6. So 4 and 6 is 10, or if you think about it, 10 take 4 is 6, 10 take 6 is 4. So we've got that. But we could break that stick anywhere. I could break it here. So there's your stick of 10, and now I've got 8 and 2 and 2 and 8. If one of those is missing, 2 and what makes 10? Well, there we've got that idea. So we've got a lot of number work, particularly in addition and subtraction. We talked about the dice game, which is really about multiplication. When we match the colour of the dice to the tower, that's a multiplication game. We certainly talked about some early algebra. So if you think about it, when we did that patterning, and we talked the idea of, then we're going to copy a pattern, we're going to continue a pattern, and we'll create a pattern. So there's your algebra happening. Problem solving, do you remember? We talked about the ice cream and the 3 or 4 flavours of ice cream. And then we talked about the spatial problem solving, about how you would join 4 cubes together. So put together that with the idea that we can use it for some statistics like the graphs that we did before and talking about the mean. I think the cube is a pretty versatile piece of equipment, and I just like sort of using it. There's a nice feel to these ones too. So our children like them because they're sort of soft to their, and they really love the pop sound. So hopefully there's a few ideas there for you, Heather, and everyone else, particularly in lockdown. And we hope you found that useful as a bit of a guide to what we can do with the cubes.
Paul, thank you so much. I thought I'd show you one of my patterns that I made. So can you see my pattern? I did yellow, green, blue, purple, and I went on. But actually, I had a thought about your ice creams, and I was thinking of what my children, or when I've taught what my children do. They'd start off with this, but then they would come up and they'd say to me that this is a pattern. Or they'd do this one as well. Oh, can you see it?
Yeah.
Can you see it?
I reckon that ice cream scoop's going to fall off the ice cream like that.
So do we take these as ice creams? I think they'd probably just say that they're a different form of how they'd do it. So I was wondering whether we could use these as patterns as well. They'd come through. I can definitely say that that's something that my sons would do. Thank you very much to Paul and his team again. It's a wonderful to have and to learn so much about the cubes and actually to look at them in a different light and have more depth, because you know, cubes are one of the most versatile activities, and if you don't necessarily need an abundance of product at home or anything like that, or even in the classroom, but things like this can be used for multiple ages, which is what we love, and multiple learning groups as well. I just want to mention that the webinar will be up on the first Monday of the month on both YouTube channels. It's Dr. Paul Swan Maths, or Dr. Paul Swan, and at EDX Education. So thank you very much, Paul, and thank you very much to your team. We'll say bye.